the most important strategy tip for a brand new best ball player is that. More this week on the couch, if we're talking best ball strategy and drafting, one of the people we're going to check in with, Pete Overzet. Pete, what's the most important tip for someone that's new to best ball?
The simplest thing, if I was hopping in a draft for the first time, is quantity or quality, not both. And that refers to how you are allocating your draft capital to a specific position. I think you can make basically any start in fantasy football work. You want to get that elite QB, you want to get those two running backs. But once you have a high quality at a position, you can't devote a ton of quantity to it. So you love zero RB? Great. You start with 5 wide receivers. Well, you can probably only take one more. You have devoted the premium capital on that position, and now you need to make up for your weaknesses with quantity.
Yeah, it's like you can't have your cake and eat it, like fantasy football style. We're going to talk meat and potatoes fantasy, but I have to admit I'm a Pete Overzet fanboy in some ways, especially as a content creator. I hate the term in our industry. So I'm just going to get right to it, Pete, and say, and if folks, if you don't know his work, um, I think, and I say this with nothing but love in my heart when I say it, because you're giving. I mean, we start out with great tips, but when I say you're the clown prince of fantasy football, I'm really focusing on prince more than clown. But what I love about what you do, Pete, and what I try to do occasionally, is like we should never take ourselves too seriously. It's fantasy football. Come on. And you, in a very graceful way, because we're always laughing with you. You're not laughing at us. You're one of us. So you have found a way to simultaneously take it all too seriously, like we all do, and remind us to not take it too seriously. And I just wanted to ask you, like, where does that story start? What's the origin story of how now in this world you're the guy that's helping us stay loosened up?
Well, I appreciate that. And it's so funny you say that because when I got obsessed with fantasy football, On the Couch was one of the first podcasts I found where they weren't just doing like NFC preview or top 10 quarterback ranks. And I mean, this is back early 2000s. And I was like, wait, there's just people who are going to kind of vibe out, see where the conversation goes, talk about the most important things on their mind. And I just relished that so much. It was the first kind of format like that. And so I'd be lying if I say that kind of thought hasn't informed my sensibilities. A lot of the shows I do are the free flowing conversations with my guys over on Ship Chasing. Like we just love getting to the weeds, what's going on in these tournaments,
Yeah.
what's going on into ADP. And you know what? Sometimes, and you probably know this too, it's like if you don't optimize it for YouTube, you don't got the hook or whatever, it's hard to bring in new people. But for the people who do find it and love it, like that is the best way to do content.
Yeah, it is. Well, I think that what I would follow that up with is, I started out at the Newhouse School at Syracuse. It's class of 97. I dropped out in 1994 of the Newhouse School. That was coming up when they said, you can be whatever you want to be. And I said, well, I want to be the play-by-play announcer for the Pittsburgh Pirates. And I went to Revolution. Then you went to the Newhouse School, broadcast journalism. You can't swing a dead cat in the sports media world without hitting like 7 people that went to Newhouse. And I dropped out partially because, or maybe mostly because, it's felt to me like the curriculum was making everybody sound like and write like everybody else. It was converging at one idea, right? And we all understand this. We all have this idea of, if you're imitating, I'm in sportscaster mode, you're looking live or whatever, that there's this thing that everybody converges at. But where the real love and connection is in fantasy football is how we're all individual and unique, and how each of us approach it and with our own unique experiences and background. That's one of the things I love about football guys. We have, doctor, hedge fund manager, criminal defense lawyer, teacher, like all these different people from all these different backgrounds, and they bring that to how they do fantasy football and just how they live. And I think, and it's funny that you say too about like just vibing. So let's talk about the randomizer. Uh, because I mean, it's right there. It's right in the name. And in some ways, you've turned into a science what I am trying to do on this show every week, which is create a space, a vacuum, and kind of conjure something into it that only could be conjured in that, see the fish poster behind me, and musically, I would probably prefer to talk about other things than Fish at this point. But back in my formative years, one of the things about going to see a Fish show was that it was something created in that moment, in that place, and only in that moment and place, and nowhere else ever again would it be created. And that's what I try to do with my show. But with the randomizer, you really are doing it because it pulls your guest into the moment, whether they want to be there or not.
Yeah, and that was one of the first shows I started doing regularly. That was right when the pandemic hit. I all of a sudden had a lot of free time. And now I do a lot more, I would say, I don't want to say typical fantasy analysis, but actually like, hey, I want to help you win in these best
Sure.
ball tournaments. But back then I was approaching it specifically from an entertainment lens. What's I like fantasy football, but I'm not going to be a normal analyst. I'm not as good at that as other people. Let me just do what I do well, which is entertainment. I had an improv background in this wheel spinning concept just kind of clicked for me. And initially, when I did it, it'd be like, you can only draft someone on a team that has birds mascots or whatever, which was like fine. It was still novel in the space. But then what it's evolved to is playing off of someone's personal brand. What are the things they're
Mhm,
into? And I got to get you
mhm.
on the show here,
Yes.
Sig, and we will definitely have some fish related prompts, I'm sure. But that's what it's been so fun. Like you said, you throw them into the chaos of this and you get to see the true personality of
Mhm.
someone that's separated just from their fantasy analysis.
Yeah, one of the things I people are really nice to me. The fantasy community, both the listeners and the fellow content creators, I feel like I have to do some sort of fake voice every time I use that term. Uh, everybody's so kind to me because I don't send out show sheets. Show sheet?
Yeah.
What's that? And people have told me privately afterwards that they were just waiting and didn't get one, and they were kind of terrified because I didn't send them a show sheet, and they were used to going in ready for everything that was going to come and almost rehearsed or pre-composed. And it's not like that can't be very helpful. Like you said, when it comes right down to it, to help you win your league or to get the most rigorous analysis, maybe that's how you get it in podcast or YouTube video form. But that also takes all the spontaneity out, and I think it does make us more wooden and robotic when we're talking, and we're not talking the way we actually talk. I mean, that's what Cecil and I set out to do with the Audible when we started it, is just make something that sounds like all we did is take our 3-hour phone call about the draft and record it. I mean, that was actually the actual origin story of the Audible. We were so geeking out on the draft, we talked about it for 3 hours and said, well, why Cecil said, would you be interested in recording this and releasing it? This was in 2005. I think he had the phone headset next to a tape recorder playing where he would record our conversation on a cassette tape and then play it back into a phone and record it. I don't even remember. My point is the spontaneity is important and the randomizer does that. But let me ask you this. Has there been a moment you can remember, maybe even recently, where out of the randomizer comes some sort of fantasy football wisdom or comes something that takes it all the way back to, wow, because we're really just off the map and we're in the moment, something occurs to us that is new and is brilliant.
It's tough because the prompts have gotten so over the top where it's now so separated from the actual fantasy team itself that it's hard for me to say that. But there is one thing that's really funny in that when I do the randomizer draft, it's a self-contained 12-person league. People put
Uh-huh.
in $3. We're all goofing around making funny picks. It's not in a tournament setting. It's not messing up the integrity of the tournament. But one funny thing I've noticed from the drafters in there, from my community, is they often draft it as if it's a tournament team. And I'm not even, again, it doesn't matter. It's a $3 draft. But one thing that's instructive about that is how easy it is to get on autopilot with fantasy because we're always kind of just mapping what we're comfortable with into potentially a new environment. And I think
Yeah.
that's relevant to, if you play a lot of dynasty, it's like you can't just approach a redraft league like dynasty, or you can't just approach a best ball league like a dynasty league. In that the league setting, Scott Fishbowl is a great example of this. Like if you try to do what you do in your home league in Scott Fishbowl, you are going to get crushed because the league
Yeah.
settings are so different. And so that's something I've been thinking about a lot. Underdog's been releasing a lot of different variations of
Yep.
tournaments. There's slight tweaks. It's still 18 rounds, yada, yada, but they fundamentally change how you think about it. And so that's just one funny thing from the randomizer. It's like, this is a
Mhm.
12-person joke league and you guys are still stacking up week 17 in here.
Right, right. Well, if there's something that you take out of that, and this is on the couch, so we're always highly psychological here. It is that the tendencies are so deeply ingrained that they become like muscle memory for drafting. And one of the things that I've said a lot on this show over the years is the number one best strategy tip, since we're talking about strategy tips in fantasy football, is know your scoring and lineups. I mean, I think that if you really thoroughly explore the implications of that phrase, know your scoring and lineups, that is probably worth as much as all the other strategy tips put together, because it's what you're talking about, is that these small changes in scoring or adding another spot to a lineup or taking another spot away from a lineup can skew positional value off of what people are ingrained to think about, like you said, or what's important, even just what's important in a fantasy league. And you can exploit that very easily, uh, just by, I mean, it's a classic moment whenever you're drafting, you think, like, did anybody notice this is a tight end premium league? Or did
Yeah.
anybody know? Because you're watching how they're drafting, like you're describing, you're watching how they're drafting. And you're saying, well, it doesn't seem like you've actually wrestled with the format of this league. It's not reflected in how you're using your picks. So it's again like this. I like to say the secrets of the universe aren't secret. They aren't secret. Know your scoring lineups. Well, yeah, but what that means is think about how this particular league scoring and lineups may skew it from the norm of what people are used to, and then you can take advantage of that. So that's cool. I mean, I ask you just on that thing because I mean, you're prolific, and you're also doing content with a lot of great, incisive, and live, and playful, and stimulating minds. So I think you're probably about as situated as well as anybody to know about the best ball community, right? And like their mindset as a whole or otherwise. And I think one of the things you already said that fits right in the show, and that's stuff we love to talk about, is you're learning what the best ball community doesn't see about itself when it looks in the mirror, if that makes sense. So like, tell me, like, what have you learned as a member of and one of the like thought leaders in the best ball community?
Yeah, it's been really interesting to see it develop over the past few years. Like when I even started the randomizer, Underdog hadn't even launched yet. They were in that limbo. FanDuel had acquired them, they shut down, and then they relaunched, or they were draft at the time. And then they relaunched as Underdog. And so I did my first ones. I did some on drafters, I did some on draft. And that was way back when. And so to watch the space evolve and for there to actually be a distinctive best ball community is wild. And they are a
Yeah.
different breed of
Yeah.
fantasy player because one of the biggest selling points of best ball is you can do a ton of drafts without having to pay the piper and manage them. So what that means is it breeds this community of people who love to draft, who are now putting up just insane numbers of drafts. Like I've drafted Sig probably 200 plus
Yeah.
teams already this offseason. Most people would be like, that is insane. It
Right.
pales into comparison with what people are doing in my community right now. I mean, they dwarf my numbers. And so I think what I have found is, and you know this about anything in life, right? The more reps you get, the better you get at something. And I do really think the best ball community has some of the best drafters out there right now, just because they put in the time and you get that feedback. You see your results after a year. I put 150 teams in and I see what worked and what didn't. And when you have that skin in the game, you have no choice but to elevate your game, consume the data, consume the news, make better teams. Otherwise, you're going to torch a lot of money in the process.
Yeah. Although some of the best ball drafters probably have a lot of money to torch. I mean,
That's
they're
true.
right. I mean, it's the
Yeah.
fun. It's the dopamine. I mean, that's the thing, right? I mean, that's what drew me to fantasy football was drafting. That's the best part. It's not necessarily the most important part in classic lineup setting fantasy football, and this is where Matt Waldman, got to mention Matt Waldman at least once an episode, and his idea, his comparison to a table and the four legs of a table, and drafting is just one leg of that table, and there's also waiver wire, there's trading, there's lineup setting. Uh, these are all skills too, but in best ball, no, that's it. It's a unicycle, or I don't even know what the mixed up metaphor would be.
Yeah.
That's it. It's draft and you're done. And I think one of the things that you said, you go back and you see what worked, and I think that's what's. I think that what people might not understand about best ball and why I would recommend that for folks that are listening to this. I don't have a referral code to make money off of it or anything like that, but do more best ball. Do more best ball. Like you said, there's low stakes. I'm in Louisiana, so that's a whole other conversation about
Oh, yeah.
legislatively. Like I'm not in the best ball streets like I used to be, but I go back to the MFL 10
Yeah.
days. We're still doing, I think we're on MFL 10 of death. I don't even know now, 9 or 10, 11.
That always signifies the start of the new year for me. I'm
Right.
like, what's Sean Siegel doing in that league this year? What is
Exactly.
Thorman cooking up? What's
Yeah.
Sigmund doing? It's so
Right,
fun.
right. And we're finding out too, by the way, Pete, in the moment. Like, what am I going to do? I mean, that's the thing, because it's sharpening your skills. Iron sharpens iron against all these other minds. And what you learn more than anything else when I get in there in the ring in the battle royale with all those amazing, brilliant minds that we meet up year after year, what I learn is, oh, I'm not going to get away with that. That's not going. Really quickly you see, because ADP, it's something everyone should be conversant and fluent in, because it at least gives you expectations. You should never let it draft for you. I mean, I think it's reasonable to say sometimes maybe you take a player because it's 2 or 3 rounds after ADP and he's still sitting there and you're just saying, like, I don't know, nothing stands out. Sure, I'll just lift, why is the crowd letting this player fall? Maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But it's more this idea of, even if you can look at underdog ADP, which is people with skin in the game, even when you get in with Pat and Sean and so on, immediately JJ, Mike, so many
Yeah.
wonderful people, thought leaders. You see, like, well, the underdog ADP may say this player's a 6th round pick, but if you want him and anybody else smart is in the room, you better take him in the 5th. And those kinds of small adjustments can be the difference between winning and losing the league. The other thing I'll say is, for redraft players, and this is really the larger point it's getting to for redraft players, is do some best ball leagues, because it just flexes your draft muscles. It just knocks off some of the rust, or otherwise it gets you in the game, in the live bullets moment when you have to make some of these decisions that you weren't prepared to make. Getting back to spontaneity and things like that. But I love that you started out with, like, you've done 200 drafts, and that's not even close to, like, the most degenerate sicko
Yeah.
thing. And it reminds me, I always remember David Dodds. David retired, but Football Guys was Joe Bryant, our mayor, value-based drafting, and David Dodds. And Joe is just one of the most golden souls I've ever met. And that's why professionally I wanted to be at Football Guys, and still I want to be at Football Guys. But also David was one of the people that I would classify as a genius. We throw the word genius around a lot. I like to mention about him that his brain worked in a different way. It works in a different way. He had to put graphite on Rubik's cubes because they didn't spin fast enough to keep up with his brain when he was solving them. He could usually solve. You could hand him a Rubik's cube in any combination. He could solve within like 22 seconds or something like that.
Crazy.
He was also in the 70s, like one of the OG skaters. I think his dad knew about, like, the places in Southern California where they were making subdivisions, but they weren't moved in yet. So there were, like, empty pools and things, just that classic picture. David was there. And I remember when the internet poker boom was happening, I could watch David with like 8 different games up on his screen at once, right? I mean, that's the thing. And now there are people that have taken that and transferred it over to fantasy football with best ball drafting, where you have like 6 drafts going at once. I found a point where I would start mixing up drafts. I was like, okay, that's too many,
Yeah.
because I just took a pick for another team in this league. But I guess I'll say, since you did 200 drafts, what have you learned so far this year about 2024? What stands out as something that you've learned this year?
Yeah, for sure. And one other just point on the,
Yeah.
encouraging people to get reps. I think that's important. It helps you be a little less precious about your drafts. I think when you have one draft, you're like, I gotta get this guy and I want to do this structure and I
Mm-hmm.
need this to happen. Otherwise, I'm gonna be mad. You do a few drafts and you're like, you know what? I actually like how this one turned out. And then you can open yourself up to something incredible happening. Like, holy cow, I did not think Josh Allen would fall to the 6th round of my home league draft.
Right,
I
right.
know that's an extreme value. I was committed to going Jaden Daniels late, but you know what? I'm going down this path. Like, just seeing a bunch of different draft boards will allow you to draft a better team because you won't be pigeonholed into something you want to do. But yeah, I think this year, and one thing that's super fun about best ball and the limited data we have, in that data is descriptive. It tells us what worked last year. And there are some macro year over year trends. And I'm glad you mentioned MFL 10. I just made a video on my YouTube channel, the Deposit Kingdom channel, where I looked at the elite tight end strategy. And a lot of people push back on it because they say, hey, it's just a couple slates that we have from these previous best ball manias. And I said, whoa, whoa, whoa. Let's go all the way back to the original MFL 10 data. I can look at these roster construction explorers. I like checking those out on RotoViz. And you can see that the top 2 percentile teams have been using elite tight end in the best ball format going back over a decade. And this data can show us there. So to me, that's like a year over year trend that continues to have, merit. But then other things aren't necessarily the case. Like last year, I thought it was a particularly great year for late round quarterback. Win rates for late round quarterback are going to look great. CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, Brock Purdy, even Sam Howell was giving you usable weeks. This year, maybe the player archetypes, the targets don't line up to make it a dominant strategy. And so I think that's what's so fun is people do fall prey to recency bias and say, I'm going to try to do what worked last year, this year, but it only works if the player targets line up. And going back to the elite tight end thing, because elite tight end was mostly a bust last year. Travis Kelce didn't heat up until the playoffs. We had Mark Andrews got hurt, didn't finish the season. Darren Waller is now an R&B artist. He didn't pay off. And all of the big hits, Laporta, double-digit round pick, league winner. McBride, double-digit round pick, league winner. So everyone now is like, yeah, I don't want to do the elite tight end thing. And so the elite tight ends are cheaper than they've ever been as a cohort. And on top of that, we don't have this rich influx of talent via the rookie tight ends like we had last year with Laporta, Dalton Kincaid, Luke Musgrave. So I think people who are trying to jam last year's late round tight end strategy are going to run into some player target issues. And I think on the flip side, the kind of I don't want to deal with the elite tight end bust like last year has swung too far, and it's made it an incredible opportunity this year.
Yeah, what's really fun about fantasy football, and maybe I just overfit this to my narrative. I am the mayor of Narrative Street. Is there's a lot of things that, like, as it is in the NFL, so it is in fantasy football, right? We're trying to make a simulation that has enough connections back to football that it gets the juices flowing. And as I like to bring up sometimes, let's just remember what fantasy football is. It's basically like watching a team, watching the GM and coach and what they do and say, I can do better than that.
Yeah.
And giving yourself some little forum to prove that you can do better, or at least you can do better than your buddies that you argue about football with or something like that. Right. And I think that as for instance, people say abolish kickers. What's your position really quick when people say abolish kickers in fantasy football?
I'm not, to me, it's like, no, go play in the leagues you want to play in. So if you want to play in a league with kickers, I promise you can find those people. You can find your people. And if you don't, and then it's like live and let live, right, Sig? There's people who love kickers. Like, I'm not gonna get upset because you like
Right.
kickers. Like I'm just not gonna do that.
Live and let live. No, this is great. I mean, that's an off-ramp to any number of topics. Which we may end up getting to. Yeah, I love that, and I think that's probably the right answer. But I tweak people a little bit. I try to be a little bit provocative and say, hey, look, an entire team's season can come down to their kicker.
Yeah.
So by having kickers and that random influence, we're simulating football just a little bit more accurately. And people might say, well, we're not really trying to simulate football accurately, and that's fair. But the idea that I don't want my fantasy matchup to come down to kickers. Kickers have nothing to do with being good at understanding football or predicting what's going to happen. Exactly. That's what happens in the NFL too. Sometimes, not all the time. And by the way, when you said artist for Darren Waller, you use that term very loosely. It's very kind of you.
I'm a nice guy. Like you said, I'm charitable. Live and let live. Even Darren Waller.
Yeah. Well, I hope he finds some peace, man. I mean, what a story Darren Waller has been. And I suppose maybe if he'd gotten traded to a different team than the Giants. But going back to what you said too, I want to delve a little deeper into the way you said, if I'm hearing you correctly, you don't get attached to any one draft really when you're drafting so many best ball teams, and it helps. And I will say, you should have your team of record, like your local league, or the Football Guys staff league. It's the staffers that have all been with Football Guys the longest, so it's like the OG staffers. That one's important. There should be some leagues that, in some ways, all this preparation you do through the best ball leagues, you're doing it so that you can win that league. This idea that That's where it matters. But I want to piggyback on what you said by doing all these drafts, because if you're attached, you're like, I'm going to take Kamani Vidal in every. I want to make sure he's on every one of my best
Yeah.
ball teams, right? So I'm going to take him in the 10th round, because the reality is, if Vidal hits, I like to say, as soon as the season starts, reaches become values, and values look like reaches.
Yep.
So even because sometimes you'll say like, everyone likes to talk about percentages, exposure. I want 80+% exposure, and by doing a lot of drafts, you can say, well, I'm not going to take Vidal in this draft. I'm going to see how far he falls if I don't take him.
Yep.
And then you can get some valuable data. But if you're attached to the team, it feels like betraying yourself. It's the 12th round and he's still there. I got to take him. It's the 13th round. He's still there. I got to take him. So I think that's another neat thing, is it allows you to explore all of these what if scenarios.
For sure. And like, if you do one draft, it's your mental thing is like, this is the only team that matters. Everything I do here has to work out. This is all I have. If you draft a bunch of best ball teams, your brain naturally isn't thinking that way. You're not saying, if you thought that way, you would just stop drafting. I already drafted the winner.
Yeah,
Why do I
exactly.
have to draft more? So it forces you to think in ranges of outcomes, probabilities. And so, using the Kamani Vidal example, it forces you to ask yourself, okay, he's going right next to Ray Davis in a lot of these underdog drafts. Maybe I think Kamani Vidal has an easier path to just being the lead back on the Chargers. Ray Davis isn't just going to naturally supplant James Cook. But then you start saying, what are the ways this could go wrong? What are the true probabilities? What if Kamani Vidal is buried on the depth chart? What if J.K. Dobbins is back and more healthy than we imagined? What if the draft capital puts him on the practice squad to start? What if the Bills have been showing us all along that they want a complimentary back and Ray Davis is the goal line back on one of the best offenses in football right off the rip? Well, all of a sudden, I start to then do this little probability math in my head. And I'm like, okay, maybe I prefer Kamani 55% to 45%. Does that mean I want to have Kamani in 100% of my drafts and
Right.
James Cook in zero? Or do I want to kind of have a humility to understanding the randomness within that tier?
Oh man, humility. Like, you nailed it. That word humility. Because I'm wrestling with this off season. I think as fantasy football analysts, a lot of what we do is put the searchlight over the conventional wisdom and find where the conventional wisdom we think is wrong, and then take that to the people, to our listeners, to our followers, consumers, customers, clients,
Mhm.
and say they're wrong, so do this. But I feel personally like I haven't spent enough time thinking about, well, what if they're right? What am I missing because I'm convinced they're wrong? And I think that's exactly what you just laid out, that doing this allows you, and it is based on humility. But to go back to what you were talking about with strategies and looking at things year over year, and how fantasy football maps so well to the NFL, the kicker point is that it's a copycat league. It's a copycat league. You've heard that forever, right? Fantasy football is a copycat hobby,
Yeah.
right? Because as you're describing, and it's very psychological. What happened last year is imprinted on us. The trauma, the success, whatever, the biases of experiencing that with individual players, with strategies, and so on, with teams, but buying into certain teams, how that went, or a theory, trying out your hypothesis, how did that go? And then it's going to influence what you do the next year. But if you're still doing what you did last year, it's not going to work. You actually have to devise a strategy for a community that is stuck in last year, and then what is the right way to it's the zig where everybody
Yep.
else is zagging. But sometimes it's difficult to change lanes. So that ability to shift, that ability to understand, if everybody else is going on this fork of the road, then my strategy should actually be, it's the I always quote Wayne Gretzky too, like, skate to where the puck's going to be, not to where it is. And I think looking at what worked last year is looking like at where the puck was even.
Yep.
And but as you pointed out with data, you're I don't want to make you blush, Pete. But you're a gem, because I think that you really embody, like you say, like, I can tell, like, it's fun for you to look at these sheets of data. Like, that is an enjoyable activity, just as much as like doing a show where y'all are yucking it up is an enjoyable activity. So you really have one foot in both of these communities. and you can actually look at the data and verify that reliably year after year people do what worked last year. Like there's not like a meta catch up. There's not like where
Yeah.
the community all at once goes, oh, we should stop doing what we did last year. We should be drafting as if everybody else is going to do that, and then what will work if everybody else does that. And then like you added that other layer in about how each player pool is unique, and what worked might have worked because of the way the players were distributed, had nothing to do with the strategy. So I mean, do you think that's accurate? That like by looking out over the data, you can see that this consistently happens every single year.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's both hard and, the zigging, not zagging, because there are some macro trends that I think are really hard to swim against. So wide receivers have continually gotten pushed up on underdog. We now just see how things play out on a site where you can start up to 4 wide receivers versus only 3 running backs, 2, and then the flex. Even with the only half point PPR scoring, we see how the ceilings of these wide receivers in the playoff gauntlet are able to separate from a lot of the running backs. So there's these trends, and some people are like, I'll fight against that. I'll start my draft with 4 straight running backs. In the way the dynamics work, if all the other drafters in the room are gobbling up those wide receivers, it's like impossible to make it work, even though you're trying to be contrarian. But what's really fun is that true zig zag mentality played out, I think, last year, in that 2022 zero RB crush, the team that won the regular season championship on underdog, was a true zero RB team. Everyone said, all right, I'm not touching these running backs.
Mm.
And what happened is you got Brees Hall in the 4th round. You got Travis Etienne in the 4th round. You got James Cook in the 8th round. You got these backs that typically would have gone in the 2nd, 3rd round in previous years, but everyone said, I'm not doing it. Zero RB crush. I'll just grab my Miles Sanders in the 8th round, my Josh Jacobs in the 9th round. I'll win. Why don't I do this? And so if you were willing to basically hold 2 truths in your mind at the same time and be like, yes, I need to get this wide receiver firepower, but I'm going to take a detour here for Brees Hall. I'm going to take a detour here for Travis Etienne because that guy is mispriced because of a macro trend last year. Then you were able to create super teams in 2023.
Yeah, I think you laid out just an excellent blueprint for something I use a lot more words to say when I put the draft day game plan out every year, which is have a plan, but be flexible in the moment. And being flexible can just be as simple as listen to your intuition. If you're disciplined and you're drilled that you're going to try to stick with this draft plan, but then when the pick is coming up, you're like, I feel like I need to veer from the plan here, that you probably need to veer from the plan. Like that intuition is telling you, if you've already convinced yourself this is the right way to approach drafts, and now you're saying, I better, maybe this is like, there's like a life tip here. Speaking of life tips, I can't remember who it was, but I know that somebody that's been on the couch in the past, in the last 10 minutes and off the rails, when I asked them about something, they said participating in an improv exercise that changed their life. Like it just changed their life. And you said you have an improv background. And I mean, I'd like the idea of bringing up improv because I think it's kind of mystical. You're tapping into something more mystical, something different, create the true mystical kind of creation. But unpack that for me when you say you have an improv background.
Yeah, it's so funny because it does kind of dovetail when I started listening to the couch, because I remember driving to improv rehearsals on Tuesday nights, and I believe at the time this would have been like early 2010s, like 11, 12. It would post like sometime Tuesday evening, and I was always hoping for my commute to rehearsal that On the Couch was going to be released for me to listen to. But yeah, when I first moved out to Boston, my wife is from here. I didn't know anybody. It was right after college, and I was like, my friends were doing some stand up, and I'm like, I'm not quite a stand up guy, but I'm pretty quick on my feet. Used to love Whose Line Is It Anyways growing up. Thought it would be a good way to meet people. So just signed up for some improv classes. And that ended up being like a 5 to 6 year thing where I was on house teams, did a little traveling improv through a theater in Boston or in Cambridge called Improv Boston, and ended up meeting some collaborators. The first fantasy football content I actually did in the space was called the Fantasy Football Comedy Hour. And it was a live show that a couple of my improv buddies who were equally as obsessed with fantasy as me were like, hey, let's do some sketches, let's do some bits. And then these poor people in Cambridge are showing up for like hyper specific niche comedy. And we were like, this should probably be a podcast. Like, let's go to where the fantasy football fans are instead of subjecting random audiences in Cambridge to this. But I do think that background it encouraged me of like, I love this idea of a live performance and then it disappears and it's gone and it'll never be seen or heard again. But on the other hand, as a creative, you're kind of like, I want something to show for my time as well. So transitioning to writing videos, podcasting, and being able to share that with a wider audience was a logical leap. But it informs, whether consciously or subconsciously, like so much of how I approach content and interacting with people to this day.
Yeah, I was gonna say, because I think the thing about improv, and I have done very little except like my life, my entire life is kind of an improv sketch. Um, is it's kind of intimate, you know. You're really occupying the moment with each other, and it's playful. Hopefully, I mean, it's supposed to be. What do you think makes someone good at improv, or what is important if you're gonna step into, like, if someone's listening to this right now and they're like, maybe I should check that out. Like, what is an important thing to be thinking about when you go in there?
Yeah, I do think it is. You can't be afraid to look like an idiot. You have to be willing to fail. Sometimes they refer to it as dying on stage. In comedy they call it bombing. But one of the nice things about improv, and I gravitated to it relative to stand up, is like when you do stand up and you bomb, you are by yourself on that stage. There is no one else. With improv, you got people around you. You are all in that together. But having that ability to laugh at yourself, to not come in with an agenda and really be able to say, I am going to listen. So much of improv is listening and
Hmm.
reacting to a reality that your stage partner has already created. And so I think maybe the best way to simplify it is like not going in with expectations or an agenda and being open to what comes. And then you build that reality together. And some people are like, oh, I'm not funny. I wouldn't be good at, like, yes, your innate sensibilities are probably never going to change. But improv, will you become a better actor just through reps? Absolutely. Will you become more confident? Absolutely. Will you become a better public speaker? Absolutely. Even if you don't have those skills, getting on stage, getting thrown to the wolves, you will get
Hmm.
better at those things. But yes, at our essence, who we are, our sensibilities, our comedic sensibilities, that is mostly a static thing, I think.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, there's no need for any rails when we're hanging out with Pete. Well, no, because this is the important stuff. This is the important stuff because I think the step that you took there that people might not have been thinking about or expecting is it will spill over into your life and your self-image and how you walk in this life, because it really is a microcosm of our life. I mean, we're all kind of dropped into a situation and kind of learning what's in the situation and fitting into it and adding what we can add to it. We're all on stage. All the world's a stage. Shakespeare. I always, like, I quote that. I quote like once a week.
I
It
love it.
comes up naturally because I think there's a truth in there. Um, and I love that you said listening and reacting. And again, as it is up on the stage, so it is in life, where listening and understanding other people's inner lives, or creating a connection, being willing to create a connection to other people. I mean, that's, I still think, what's at the heart of fantasy football. I still think the heart of fantasy football is it's hard for men to make friends. There's a lot of great female content creators and female players. I'm not trying to say that it's only men, but I think the origin, or like why it took off, is like it's a way for us to make friends and keep each other company in a way that is, intimacy or connection is not something that is a big part of socialization of men. Hopefully, males. Hopefully, it becomes a bigger part of it. But fantasy football makes it easy, and we keep each other company. So many times, whether it's emails I've gotten from people who listen to the show, or even within the context of fantasy leagues, um, other men, will unburden about things that have nothing to do with fantasy football. Divorces, death of parents, problems with their kids, and things like that, where it's not as comfortable or socially accepted to do that in other places. It's a safe space, right? But like you said, the key is listening and reacting. And if I would add to that, like, be generous. We're occupying the space together, so be generous to each other. I would guess that some of the most satisfying experiences you had come out of people being generous to each other and saying, like, oh, I see, I'm not making this about me or how brilliant okay, yeah, I'm going to follow you and take we're going to go where you're going. And then if everybody's doing that, something really special can happen. And that's as it is in life. But you said it would make you a better actor too, and I think that's really interesting because I think that so much of acting is draw from your experiences or draw
Yeah.
from something in your life, right? But that's hard to do if you're trying to do it. But when you're in the improv space, this formless space, you have nothing to draw on but your experiences. Like
Yeah.
almost, it's essentially you have to do that. So you learn to do that through this kind of no without a net acting, and it gets you to a place that you can't get by trying to get there. You have to be, like you said, thrown into it. And hey, this all comes back to fantasy football and drafting, right? Because that's again, it's an experience happening in the moment that understanding what's happening right now in this draft and with this group of
Yeah.
people is the key to winning that draft, and not just treating it like every other draft you've done. Anyway, that's enough on my soliloquy about improv. But it's off season, so we can let these kinds of topics breathe. I guess I'm assuming if you're still here listening, folks, then you're not going to get which quarterback is going to win your league this year. Although there's a lot of great content on Pete's channel for that and Football Guys for that. But let's just go ahead and veer off the rails, and maybe we've already kind of touched on this. But if it wasn't fantasy football, if it wasn't adding what you're adding to our space in the wonderful way that you do it, what are some of the things or a thing you might be doing right now?
Yeah, I was thinking about that recently because I have kind of like carved out a dream job in that I just do the stuff I would be consuming or listening to, or basically spending all my free time doing. I've just kind of systemized into being a job, and have been fortunate to get paired up with some great companies like Underdog and Fantasy Life who make that a reality. I think when I initially was looking for jobs, I wanted to do something creative. I think if I went the corporate angle, like so many people, I watched Mad Men and I was like, man, that would be fun. Like, get me in the room, let's spitball some ideas for ad campaigns. I'll do my best Don Draper. I could see myself of, being a copywriter, at a marketing agency, hopefully coming up with some like really fun campaigns, which doesn't sound as fun as what I'm doing now, but I think I would have enjoyed that in a different life.
Yeah, idea person, right? uh, I like that. I like that you brought up Mad Men. Mad Men's one I'll pull from. There's a lot in there,
Oh yeah.
There's a lot in Mad Men. There's a lot about the United States in Mad Men. I have always felt like Don Draper was like the American man, right? The true self-created, right, individual. Like he took on someone else's identity and then he just ran with it, and America was like, yes, more, yes, more, yes,
Yeah.
more. It was really interesting to me. Well, let me ask you this: what is what's your, so you say corporate? So I'm assuming that you went to college or have, or at least
Yeah.
what's your background, or what was when you were picking? It's so weird. Zen, our motorcycle maintenance, has a passage about this of like, why are we getting people when they're 18 years old and know nothing about the world choosing their life's path? But we do choose that when we're around that age. What did your background come in when you were in college?
Yeah, I mean, my technical, I'm one of the few people who, like, what I actually did in college kind of helped for what I'm doing. I studied media communications.
Hmm.
But it really, honestly, and I'm sure other people have this same experience, it was like the ancillary stuff, like high school and college writing, like comedic op-ed columns for the school and college newspaper. Had a music blog with one of my buddies, my freshman year of college. Started making videos with friends, doing bits like that. It's like that was my education. That's what gave me like the foundation to want to do all of this stuff that I'm doing today. And it just so happened that I was paying a lot of money to learn classes while actually learning the important stuff on the side.
Right? Young people, if you're out there listening, younger people, you're still pretty young. Uh, um, do all that other stuff, the classes and getting good grades. Okay, that's great, but it's all the stuff that you get to do with other people when you're in college. That's what it breaks my heart a little bit to know that, like, taking classes online and just getting degrees as a means to something is becoming more and more widespread, and that experience, because the reality is, for those 4 years that I was at Syracuse University, I was rubbing elbows with people that I was not going to be around for the rest of my life, probably. Right? I mean, I could circulate among all these different groups of people that, but as we get further along in our life, the people around us tend to self sort into people like us. It just happens. It's just kind of how life goes. And by doing things with all those different people, you cross pollinate all kinds of cool stuff. And like you said, you learn. There's where those reps come in. Um, I guess we should have one more like fantasy football red meat moment. Um,
See what I can
tell
do.
me, tell me your the one player that you still find yourself gravitating to, when even no matter how many drafts you do, and one player that no matter how far they fall compared to ADP, no matter how much you think about like the counterfactual, what if I'm wrong? It's still really hard to take them.
Yeah, those are good ones. It's a good question to hit me with just because this week I was working on a couple pieces of content where I'm 50 drafts deep into Best Ball Mania. It's 150 max tournament. So this is like my 1/3 of the way there. And this is for through those first 50 drafts, I was kind of being like, I'm going to go get my guys. I don't care what I've already done. The guys I think are mispriced, the guys I think are going to rise in drafts. I'm going to just go get those guys. And now was the first time I kind of pulled back and I was like, all right, let's look at these teams. Let's see what we did. Let's see what are some of the trends. I already mentioned the elite tight end thing. I could tell you my most drafted player. I have over like 35% of him, which again, some people go heavier on their guys. For me, that's a lot having this guy on one out of every three teams. But it's Bucky Irving on the
Mm.
Bucks, and I know people didn't necessarily love him as a prospect, but I think this spot is just right for someone to take over some of the early down production work. Like Rachaad White has been doing that in a de facto standpoint. Rachaad White, a really good pass catcher. And now we have this what was he, a day two rookie, day three rookie,
Hmm.
who is going to be the number two back there. And I think we've seen these dead zone backs who go in the fourth, fifth, sixth round where you kind of have volume concerns that you can get into trouble overdrafting those guys based on what happened last year. And the thing is, with some of these other backs that got drafted, you're having to pay like a ninth, 10th, 11th round price tag for them. You know, guys like Marshawn Lloyd are getting more trendy. Bucky Irving's like free in these drafts. It's like every time I'm like in the 16th, I'm like, he slipped to the 17th. You guys are going to let me click him again. So
Yeah.
Bucky Irving has just been an easy click for me right now.
And Irving should be on folks' radar solely because, and I'll say shout out to Coach Speak Index.
Yeah.
I'm just glad that somebody is just taking that as a discrete topic and really helping us all be more informed about that. But and actually, Pewter Report is one of the OG independent team sites going back a lot pre-internet, I believe. I mean, a long time. I think it was Pewter Report that first put out there that Liam Cohen, the new offensive coordinator, said like in the running game now, like it's important to get to the hole quickly and be fast to the hole and through the hole. I think something like that. Um,
Yeah.
and if you've watched Rachaad White run, that's not how he runs. That's how Bucky Irving runs. Liam Cohen said that's how that and Bucky Irving does that. And we've been making it a point of emphasis to Rachaad and the other running backs that we're going to do that. I mean, the coach is telling us. I like running backs that do what this guy does. If this guy can do it, I like him too. So it's already the story's already been written. If Bucky Irving's role is much bigger than anybody thought. And the other thing is, like, we don't know how much they would have used a second running back. So the whole problem with Rachaad White last year in the dead zone was he was one of those running backs that by default was going to get touches. And those running backs never seem to do well in fantasy football, or at least they're bad bets in fantasy football. And at first, sure enough, he was extremely inefficient. Extremely inefficient. It was like, yep, that's why he was in the dead zone. But he got enough time to get entrenched in the role and started getting more productive and started doing better. But now there's a new offensive coordinator. So whatever he did, that doesn't carry over in terms of endearing himself to the coaching staff. And the reality might be that if they had a Bucky Irving last year, Bucky Irving might have overtaken him early in the season. If they had a reasonable alternative, they just didn't. They just didn't have any. So Rachaad White kept getting chances because they didn't have a viable second running back. And eventually he proved he could do something with those chances. But now he's got some more formidable competition. And then the other thing, like you said, I mean, Rachaad White finished a lot. I think what is he in underdog drafts, Best Ball Mania now, like around 60 or so, 55,
Yeah.
60?
And what's so funny about it is he had, yeah, exactly, his ADP 60. He's been dropping in a lot of drafts. And this is
Yeah.
again why I think some people, be like, oh, Pete, you just said you liked Bucky Irving, so you never take Rachaad White. And it's like Rachaad White has now been falling in drafts. And this is what's so fun about a best ball from a portfolio perspective is I can build a strong portfolio where I think Bucky Irving's always mispriced, and Rashad White is often falling in drafts. And I think that value makes sense. And now I have this portfolio where like one of these guys is probably going to be a smash. Either Rashad White's a cheap bell cow
Yep.
or Bucky Irving is coming in guns a blazing and taking this over and is paying off his tag. And it's like, I want to build teams around those two realities. I'm not taking them on the same team. I want
Right.
half of my portfolio to vault up based on that bet.
Right. And then you start looking at where the different bets are interrelated. And it's kind of like stacks, but I think there's a whole other level to stacks that we haven't explored yet. And in some cases, it might be simpler than stacks, and in some cases, it might be intertwining, uh, you know, outcomes that we only can see with the benefit of hindsight. But one of the things that I was looking at as just like a non-traditional stack, I put this out there a week or two ago, and I mean, I'm looking at the best ball streets with binoculars from far away. You're on the streets, but we all agree. I mean, look, the Ravens' offense, it could be okay. True or false? The Ravens' offense could be the best offense in the league this year.
True.
Yeah, I mean, we all agree. So why is nobody from this offense going earlier than like pick 30 or 35?
I really do think it goes back to that recency bias thing. A lot of people, I remember at the very end of drafts last year, people were taking like Lamar and Mark Andrews at the 2-3 turn because you needed to take them both together there to be able to get them paired. And the defense was really good. Mark Andrews, like I said, got hurt, didn't finish the season. None of the, Zay Flowers flashed in a way that makes us really excited about him for this year, but wasn't necessarily like the home run that even Rashee Rice was down the stretch. So there's just this lingering uncertainty. I think people have also just felt burned by these wide receivers over and over. It's like, okay, we're doing the Rashad Bateman thing again. Oh, they bring in Odell. That'll be the answer. Let's go get Odell. No, it's not Odell. And so I think people are just like, I've done this thing and I don't want to do it again, but I completely agree with you. What if the defense gets a little worse? What if they're forced to throw a bit more? And I like the rookie Devontae Walker too as a late round pick. I mean, I think a pretty exciting deep ball threat there if they really get
Right.
cooking. My most drafted tight end sig is Mark Andrews. I think I have like 26% of him. I think he's one of the most mispriced players on the board. I am with you on the Ravens being a key target for me in drafts.
Yeah, and then it linked exactly as you laid out. So, and then you want to counterbalance your Andrews teams with likely teams, because there's likely going outside of the top 150. And when Andrews was out last year, he was the number 5 tight end, and he had a higher points per game average in PPR than Andrews did before Andrews went out. So those 5 games, likely was more productive as the tight end one for Baltimore than Andrews was last year. And likely's a ascendant third-year player, but Andrews also looks mispriced. You're right. I mean, unless Andrews ADP, and I do a lot of looking at. I'm psychoanalyzing myself. I'm psychoanalyzing everybody. I do a lot of looking at ADP this year and interrelated within teams because like you said, interesting thought here with Bucky Irving. The fantasy football community is saying we don't buy that Rashad White is going to even do what he did last year. Because based on what he did last year, he should be going what?
He would be a
20 picks
second round
higher?
pick.
Second round pick. So the fantasy football community is saying we don't believe in him. Well, why aren't they pushing Bucky Irving up to like number 100 then?
I
Don't
know.
make no sense. So I'm always looking for things where the fantasy football community is of two minds about something and it doesn't add up. And I think that so you have this the fantasy football community saying we're really skeptical about Mark Andrews. I mean, Mark Andrews was a second, third round pick last year. He's a fourth, fifth round pick this year. Skepticism. So if you're skeptical about Mark Andrews, why isn't that optimism about Isaiah Likely? They two seem to fit together, but the ADP of Likely is not reflecting that. So this is the fun kind of exercises that I like to do. And you're right that when you get into portfolio, now you're coming up with a comprehensive strategy across teams and across drafts to try to get that unicorn and figuring out ways to combine those things. And that's fun. Go ahead.
No, and I was just going to say that's what's fun to me because I understand the element of like, I have my guys, I want to go get them in every draft. What's fun for me is saying, how can I draft the best possible version of this team? And so say Rashad White falls and it's like, well, Bucky Irving's your guy. Like, and now you're not going to take, and it's like, no, I am now playing this scenario where I got Rashad White in the 7th round and I'm going to treat him like a 2nd round pick.
Right.
because the reason I'm clicking him here is I'm saying, okay, he's now massively misvalued. In this new reality that I'm constructing with this team, he's a second round pick. And I'm going to build a team, not as if Rashad White's a seventh round pick, but as if he's a second, and then construct it in a way that supercharges the team, and build the best available team around that. And that to me is so fun. It is back to the improv thing. It's like, send me down these weird offshoots, and I know
Yeah.
how to structurally draft teams. And it's fun to me to be like, can I make this work? This threw me
Yeah.
out of my comfort zone. Can I build the best version of this team available?
Yeah, and then you get that muscle memory of like, oh, 3 quarterbacks are off the board by the 25th pick. I know now that we're in this set of universes, and I'm drawing from this set of experiences. And just to put a cap on the Ravens talk, so I think the Ravens are open for like non-traditional stacks, like a quarterback running back stack or a running back wide receiver stack, because it's Derrick freaking Henry. And Derrick Henry could be the missing element in this offense that makes it almost undefendable at times, or at the very least, like what we saw in what we see with Miami at times, 70 points. Like when a team is having trouble defending the Ravens, everything's going to work. Everything is going to work because they're just going to be discombobulated. You can't load the box. You have to play 11 on 11 football. There are deep threats. You mentioned Walker also adding to the deep threats. You have to defend the middle of the field. You have to defend the deep field. You have this running back that can take any touch and turn it into a touchdown if he gets past the second level. So, think fast, hot shot, pop quiz, right? And they could make the overall production of this offense so overwhelming that you just want two of the big pieces. It doesn't even matter which two, because they're all going to outproduce expectations. And so there's always more room for innovation, especially when there's all kinds of brilliant people, inspired people out there like yourself and all the people that you're talking to on your shows. Okay, well, we've kind of used up off the rails during the show. We just got. I'll just tee you up with one last off the rails question, and this certainly won't be the last time we have Pete here. Long overdue. Um, Tell me an influence, somebody that has influenced you. When you think of like the persona you've created and how you occupy this space in our space, who's influenced you?
Man, yeah, there are a lot. I would assume with like so many stuff that I do where I'm kind of like pulling little inspirations here and there. Denny Carter is definitely a big inspiration. One of the first people I saw just, willing to completely put himself out there, be the butt of his own jokes, and, foster a community of people who all shared that joke. And so I always took notes from him from afar. Someone like Adam Levitan, who I've known for
Mhm.
years, and he balances so well I'm going to be a sharp analyst. I'm going to give you really good info, but I'm going to have fun. I'm not going to take myself too
Yeah.
seriously. I think guys like that, where and Denny's just like an incredible writer as
Hmm.
well. And to see that, like, those things don't have to be mutually exclusive. Like, you can be serious, you can have fun. Like, we all
Right.
contain multitudes. And I think those two are
Yeah.
just the two that come to the top of my head of people who juggle it particularly well.
Yeah, yeah, but I think I've reached out to Denny before. I mean, I feel like Denny always has so many things going on that I want to add another thing to his plate. But but it's great because he has represented a voice, an authentic voice. One of the things I think that we can do with this platform we have is say things that are on a lot of people's minds, but they don't have a chance to say. And you hear it, and again, it's loneliness. I mean, I still think a lot of this stuff, a lot of like fantasy football pod, isn't it so weird, Pete? It's so weird that like we're kind of like sort of like cult leaders. I know when I was in law school, someone said that should have been your job. You should have been a cult leader. We kind of are cult leaders in a way that art, something about our persona, our personality. People like want to hang out with us, even though they're not hanging out with us. But we help. Joe likes to say like we're all helping walk each other home at night. And we're doing that. We're doing it with facts and incisive analysis. We're doing it with humor. We're doing it just with like being together in the moment, like we have been with Peter Overzet. And check out, if you haven't, you should have already, everything that he's doing. Go to the YouTube channel, check out all the awesome formats and shows, and we'll continue to do this journey together with you. You give us that privilege and pleasure to serve you and get to do, like Pete said, things that we like to do anyway as our job.